This game should not work. It really shouldn't. I mean, think about it. It had to follow up the single most legendary shooter of the 64-bit era. It dumped the first-person view that everyone loved, stripped out the multiplayer entirely, and handed the controller over to a perspective that made basic navigation a complete nightmare. Let's talk about how a game this unremarkable somehow managed to completely catch me off guard. Welcome back to the PlayStation Marathon, the series where I attempt to play and review every single game released on the original PlayStation in alphabetical regional order. We are only on game number 2, and the universe has already thrown in a little fascinating curveball into the schedule. Today we are looking at 007 Tomorrow Never Dies, released in 1999 by Black Ops Entertainment and Electronic Arts. Now, if you missed the first episode, there's something you need to know. Because of the sheer chaos of trying to organize a library of over 4,000 titles alphabetically, I actually ended up playing this game's chronological successor, The World Is Not Enough, first. Because of that backward jump, my expectations coming into this one were sitting squarely on the floor. The World Is Not Enough left me feeling completely cramped, so I figured sliding back a year into 1999 was going to be a brutal clunky slog. Remember, I came into this entire project with zero lifetime PS1 memories. I have absolutely no nostalgia or prior attachment to the era, and I had no idea if this specific title was considered a forgotten masterpiece or an absolute disaster by the community. I just had to load the game to find out for myself. And honestly, what I found was shocking, mostly because of how incredibly calm it felt compared to the headache that I had just come off of. To really understand what Tomorrow Never Dies was up against, you have to take a step back and look at the gaming landscape at the tail end of 1999. The entire industry was still reeling from the massive earthquake that was GoldenEye 007 on the N64. That single game redefined what a console shooter could be, and it left every single publisher on earth scrambling to capture that lightning in a bottle. When Electronic Arts, before they became evil, snatched up the coveted James Bond multimedia license, this game was their very first swing at the plate. The stakes were insanely high, but instead of just copying the exact first-person formula that Rare made famous, EA and the development team at Black Ops Entertainment decided to take a massive gamble. They tossed out the first-person camera entirely and went all in on a dedicated third-person action style. They wanted something that felt more like a playable movie, making heavy use of the PlayStation CD-ROM format to pull actual video clips directly from the 1997 Pierce Brosnan film to tell the story. It was an ambitious move, but it also meant that they were stepping right into the firing line of an audience that just wanted more GoldenEye. As it turns out, the road to getting this disc onto store shelves was an absolute mess of reworks and shifting goalposts. Originally, the project wasn't even supposed to follow the movie's plot directly. The developers spent a massive chunk of time designing a game called Tomorrow Never Dies, The Mission Continues. The concept then was to create an original sequel story that picks up right where the movie left off. But when they put these early builds in front of focus groups and playtesters, the feedback was brutal. They didn't want a spin-off, they wanted to play the actual movie they saw in theaters. So Black Ops Entertainment had to completely tear down their work and pivot mid-development. They frantically restructured the levels to mimic the movie's narrative beats, leaving just a few remnants of the original standalone ideas floating around as weird disconnected filler stages. Because of that massive identity crisis, the game suffered multiple painful delays. A highly anticipated local multiplayer split-screen mode was completely axed from the schedule just to get the single-player functional before the clock ran out. By the time they finally shipped the game in November of 1999, it wasn't just late. It was launching the same month that the next movie, The World Is Not Enough, was hitting actual movie theaters. Talk about a bizarre marketing nightmare.
Seems you and Carve have been quite busy making headlines lately.
I presume you are referring to the nerve gas attack, Mr.
Bond. James Bond.
So what does it actually feel like to hold the controller and play this thing today? Well, the core loop's about as straightforward as it gets. You run through a level, shoot a small army of bad guys, pick up items, and tap the circle button whenever the game prompts you to interact with an objective. Every now and then, the game shifts genres entirely, throwing you into a fast-paced skiing level where you are dodging trees and enemies, or a dedicated driving sequence to break up the pace. Mechanically, the shooting actually felt surprisingly fluid to me. Coming straight off the cramped first-person corridors of The World Is Not Enough, having a wild third-person view felt like a breath of fresh air, and the auto-aim system is a total lifesaver. You tap the circle button and the crosshair instantly snaps directly onto the nearest threat. You can toggle between targets with total ease, making you feel like a sleek, competent secret agent. But then you try to walk.
Oh, brother!
Moving your character around with the original door analog sticks is genuinely horrendous. It's as difficult and unintuitive as trying to control a shopping cart with a missing wheel through a cracked parking lot. And the collision hitboxes for completing objectives can be quite stubborn. You try to interact with an object, but because your body isn't angled at the exact microscopic mathematical degree the game demands, absolutely nothing happens. You then have to awkwardly shimmy yourself back and forth over and over again, praying for the press circle prompt to finally pop up on screen. The game can also be quite confusing at times. Unlike The World Is Not Enough, which constantly gave me helpful real-time updates via text messages, Tomorrow Never Dies just drops into a map and expects you to read its mind. Vital mission items and key objectives are routinely hidden away in completely random or mad corners with absolutely zero hints on how to get to them. And boy do these enemies deal a disgusting amount of damage when they catch you in a group. Because the game's free cam option doesn't let you move the camera around, you are constantly getting blindsided by guards standing just out of view. I lost count of how many times I had to flat out quit to the main menu and restart entire levels from scratch. I realized early on that the game lets your total health and retry pickups carry over from mission to mission. Knowing how brutal the game could get, I ended up pouring every single tiny continue I could find, treating them like gold so I wouldn't enter the end game completely bankrupt. Visually, the game is exactly what you'd expect from the era. It's blocky, it's sharp, and the textures occasionally warp if you stare at them too long. But given the limitations of the classic grey box, it honestly doesn't look that bad to me. There is actually a really great sense of environmental variety as you move through the campaign. 1 minute you're looking at a stark, blindingly white Russian snowscape, the next you're running through a Vietnamese market district at night, before ending up inside the cold industrial steel hulls of a military ship. The sound design gets the job done for the era. The gunshots pop, the glass breaks, and the voice acting, while entirely recast with generic lookalikes because none of the actual film actors came back to record lines, is perfectly fine. It doesn't sound awkward or stiff. The soundtrack, composed by Tommy Tallarico, is a solid piece of work as well. It fits the fast-paced cinematic vibe beautifully, even if none of the specific melodies really stuck in my head enough to make me want to search them out on YouTube after the credits rolled.
You see, I've set this boat to self-destruct in 3 minutes. You'll never escape in time.
Since the development team abandoned the original sequel script, the narrative here is basically the same as the 1997 movie. You play as James Bond, going toe-to-toe with Elliot Carver, a power-mad media mogul who has come up with the most psychotic rating scheme in human history. Carver wants to skyrocket his global television viewership by single-handedly starting a literal war between the United Kingdom and China. To kickstart the conflict, he sinks a British warship in the South China Sea, framing the Chinese military for the attack. It's standard over-the-top late 90s blockbuster cheese, and it's up to Bond to sneak in, gather information, and set the record straight before the missiles fly. Honestly, the story was highly engaging for me. I'm not someone who sits down to watch a ton of movies in my spare time, so experiencing this narrative play out across the missions felt fresh and exciting. That being said, the movie script was doing almost all of the heavy lifting here. The game itself doesn't really have any deeper themes, subtext, or unique character moments to offer beneath the surface. It's just a fun, simple vehicle to let you run around and blow things up. When Tomorrow Never Dies finally landed on store shelves, the critical reception was less of a celebratory launch party and more of a collective sigh of disappointment. The gaming press at the time was utterly merciless. Review aggregators logged the game into a thoroughly mediocre 62% average, with critics loudly complaining that Electronic Arts had completely butchered the classic Bond legacy by abandoning the first-person masterclass of GoldenEye. The lack of any multiplayer mode was treated as an absolute sin, and the industry quickly dismissed the game as a clunky, dated cash-in that fell miles short of its potential. But looking back at the sales data, the general public didn't seem to care too much about the bad reviews. The sheer power of the 007 brand name carried the game straight into a massive financial and commercial success, moving enough copies to earn a greatest hits reprint from Sony. It proved to EA that there was a massive desperate appetite for Bond on the PlayStation, which directly paved the way for them to go back to drawing board, refine the engine, and deliver The World Is Not Enough just 1 year later. After spending roughly 5 hours grinding my way through to the end credits, my lowest point during the entire playthrough came right at the very end. I had reached the final mission on the stealth boat, and because of how badly I had been mauled by guards in previous stages, I looked up and realized I had exactly one single retry left in my inventory. At this point, one mistake would be all it takes to trigger a total mission failure and a complete restart. But unlike The World Is Not Enough, this game actually gives you a massive strategic tool during boss fights. It puts the health bar right on your screen as a clear number. Being able to see exactly how much life the final boss had left completely changed how I played. I was able to carefully calculate my shots, map out my remaining health pickups, and scrape by the absolute skin of my teeth. And honestly, I had fun. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that Tomorrow Never Dies is some flawless forgotten classic. It's an unremarkable piece of software in the grand scheme of things, and suggesting any major improvements to it beyond fixing the awful movement controls and the sticky objective hitboxes would basically require building an entirely different game from scratch. But it completely subverted my low expectations. It felt significantly calmer and more accessible than its sequel, and it gave me a genuinely good time. Would I recommend you go out and find a copy today? Only if you hit 2 very specific criteria. You have to be a diehard James Bond fan, and you have to absolutely love retro gaming. If you don't fit that exact description, this one is probably safe to skip. For those who played this one back when it came out, I'd love to hear what it was like. Did you compare it to GoldenEye the whole time? And how does it compare to its sequel, The World Is Not Enough? Drop your thoughts in the comments below and let's have a conversation. And that is 2 games officially checked off the massive list. Next time on the marathon, we are keeping the secret agent train rolling, but things are getting weird. We are stepping away from the foot chases and jumping straight into the cockpits for 007 racing. Thank you so much for watching, and if you want to see if my sanity survives all 4,000 plus games on this console, make sure to hit subscribe and follow the journey. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you in the next episode.